Our guest today on Current Conversations is Dr. James E. Campbell, a leading political scientist, a scholar of national political campaigns, and a forecaster of election results. Dr. Campbell is a distinguished professor of political science and chair of the Department of Political Science at the University of Buffalo. His visit to the University of Oklahoma is sponsored by the OU College of Arts and Sciences, the OU Political Science Department, and the OU Political Science Club. Dr. Campbell, it is a pleasure to have you on Current Conversations. Thank you for being here.
I'm delighted to be here.
I think a lot of people were a little surprised at the results of the 2012 presidential election. But you're a forecaster of elections, and my guess is that you probably weren't much surprised at all.
Well, I knew that the fundamentals were aligned in favor of President Obama, but only slightly. So, I thought there was a reasonable chance that it could have gone either way. So I like every other American, was sitting in front of the television that Tuesday evening, wondering how the battleground states would fall. It wasn't a done deal by any means.
You've probably done forecasting for a lot of elections. What's your percentage of getting them right? I'm just curious.
Well, I always tell people we never get them right because there's always some error. There's no way you can use what we call the fundamental factors, the kind of the raw materials of elections, and predict with perfect accuracy how an election will turn out. There are just too many unforeseen kinds of things. Hurricanes show up.
Yeah, right.
Wall Street decides to melt down. There's all kinds of things that you really can't anticipate fully ahead of time.
Well, there are going to be a lot of issues here, but could you start by just giving us maybe an overview, say, of the Romney campaign? What did you see as the strengths of that campaign? I mean, after all, he got nearly half the popular vote, and maybe some of the weaknesses that finally fell short.
Well, I think the strength of the campaign was that he was running against an incumbent with a very weak economic record.
Yeah.
By any angle, any time span you take a look at, the record of economic growth, unemployment, any kind of indicator you look at, it was a weak economic record to run against.
People vote their pocketbooks.
Yeah, and it also affects the receptivity of the electorate toward the incumbent. If times aren't good economically, they're more likely to look askance at anything the incumbent has to say or propose. Mm-hmm. So that was his major asset going into this campaign. I think the fact that the country is a center-right nation, is also something that favored him. Even the exit polls showed that more people thought that President Obama was further away from their point of view than Mitt Romney was from theirs. So I think the
likability shot up for Romney.
Shot up, exactly. So he had a number of things going for him. Mm-hmm. The weakness, I think, was that he also had a record that was. He wasn't the generic conservative candidate that I think a lot of Republicans early on in the election season were hoping for. He brought in some baggage with him, Romney care, some flip-flops. He got bruised pretty badly during the nomination contest. Mm-hmm. And so all of those things were made it difficult. And I think in the end, one of the biggest problems was I think he got a little timid or played it a little too cautiously in the last 3 or 4 weeks of the campaign after that first debate success.
It must have been kind of confusing for him because he really was in the ascendancy for a while, and it would be tempting to ride that through and not blow it.
Right. I think they overestimated how much of a difference that first debate made. It made a difference. There's no question that brought him back in the game, even gave him a slight lead, but it wasn't enough to coast on, and I think to some extent they did that. Also, it's pretty clear that the Democrats have a better ground game at this point than the Republicans have. I think Republicans were counting on a lot of natural enthusiasm among Republicans to
get
had.
Out.
But that was not enough this year, because the Democrats had this great ground game that got their vote out to the polls, even though it might not have naturally been as enthusiastic as the Republicans were.
Now, can you give us an overview of the Obama campaign? What do you see as the strengths he brought to it, and then the downside?
Well, the most important strength is incumbency. Americans are very reluctant to turn out of office an incumbent, especially one who has succeeded the opposite party. You know, a first party term incumbent has enormous advantages. And you know, they can be the agent of change still, because they've only been in office 4 years. They can still credibly say that they're about change, but also they're the candidate of stability. Any problems they have, that can still be credibly blamed on the past president, as we saw, you know, even at the time of the election. More people thought the poor economic conditions were a result of President Bush than President Obama. That's a huge advantage for a first party term incumbent.
So Jimmy Carter was really an exception, not
Right.
getting a second term.
Right.
Yeah.
Out of 12, since William McKinley in 1900, there have been 12 first party term incumbents. 11 of them have now won.
I've even heard it suggested that the American electorate depends on that rhythm of a president going 2 terms, and when it's broken, it's jarring, and a party can come into office that in a sense isn't ready, you know what I'm saying, because of the rhythm is so well established of going 8 years.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that, but I think there's clearly, as the out party facing a first party term incumbent, there's a strong, you know, you have the burden of proof.
Yeah.
A very strong burden of proof to bear to remove that.
So incumbency, the superior ground game,
right?
And what were the downsides? The economy, obviously.
The economy was a big downside for President Obama. You know, and I think those were the crucial aspects of it. He was also had very strong pockets of base support. The African American vote, the Hispanic vote. He benefited to some extent from the gender gap.
Right.
And the women were much more inclined to vote for him. And probably the most important factor is that he did continue to do extremely well with voters under 30. That's something that the Republicans really have to worry about in future
We're
elections.
talking about pretty specific issues right now, but but you think about this era, and there's some really big picture things going on. Let me throw a couple out at you. The Citizens United decision, where the Supreme Court allowed for unlimited fundraising by super PACs. Could you talk? That had a huge impact, right?
Right. Well, it had it certainly had an impact in terms of the way the campaign was conducted. I don't think it had any impact on how the campaign turned out.
Yeah.
I mean, what Citizens United did, essentially they recognized in the First Amendment that the freedom of association and the freedom of speech allowed corporations and others, any grouping of individuals, to contribute to promoting any political views that they
spending
would
money
care to.
is equivalent to speech.
Exactly, and I think we'd have to say that it is. I mean, speech in a vacuum without money is doesn't get out there. It doesn't help promote the particular speech. So Citizens United, I think, made sense from that standpoint, and I don't think the genie can be put back in the bottle very easily here.
So much money involved now, $6 billion, I guess.
I think
amazing.
I think what we need to do is work on campaign finance laws that will allow more of that money to be funneled into the candidates, where it can be spent more responsibly.
Yeah.
Where people can say, okay, if you say this about this other candidate, well, if it's not true, then you're going to take some of the heat for it. Right now, we have third, independent expenditures saying things that might be completely irresponsible, and there's no consequence to it.
I got to think that the fact that President Obama didn't have to go through a bruising primary battle, and Romney did, that seemed like it was awfully tough on Romney too, and it backed him into some positions with Latino voters and so on that were really difficult later, right?
Yeah. And this goes hand in hand with the incumbency advantage that President Obama had. Most presidents don't face serious challenges for their own party's nomination, and that is good in two ways for them. That's a big advantage in two ways. One is simply they can coast to their nomination, so they don't have to, alter their messages in any way to get the nomination. And two, they can turn their attention right away to the general election campaign. And I think one of the big problems Romney had was that he had been essentially defined by the Obama campaign over the course of the summer. While Romney was fending off Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum, and before that, Rick Perry and other candidates, Herman Cain, there was a whole slew of anybody but Romney candidates. He had to fend them off, and while he was doing that, the Obama campaign was defining Romney as Mr. Rich Kid who takes pleasure in firing you and moving jobs offshore, and he doesn't understand your pain. Actually, that's probably one area too where Republicans have to do a lot better.
Well, I was going to ask you about this issue because I guess the criticism is that Obama took a lot of money into swing states very early on and went entirely negative, just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And then Romney was never able to redefine himself in those states, in Ohio and Michigan and a few other places.
Took him a long time. That's why I think the first debate was so crucial. This was an opportunity for Romney to, in an unmediated way, convey himself to voters, not the portrait that the media and the Obama campaign had portrayed.
I've just a kind of a factual question for you. I don't live in a swing state, so I don't know what the ads were from both campaigns, but was Obama far more negative in those ads, and Romney just never went that negative? I mean, that's the way it sounds sometimes. I have no idea.
Well, a lot of it was the ads were Obama ads and not Romney ads, and so a lot of the Obama ads at that point in those states were negative about Romney, portraying him as this, out-of-touch businessman. And we saw some evidence of this, and this is not just for this election, but other elections, other recent presidential elections. Republicans are not seen as being as compassionate, as feeling, having a sense for people like us as much as the Democratic candidates are. That's something they really need to work on.
What about the voter suppression issue? At least that's the way it played in the media, that in a lot of the swing states, there were laws passed and policies implemented that seemed to keep potential Democratic voters away from the polls more than Republicans. What's your feeling about that?
One, I don't think it was true, and obviously, if it was true, it didn't work.
Yeah,
I don't think it was true. I mean, I think that we have to do something about voting in this country, though, to make it more sensible. We have early voting. We have all kinds of questions about voter fraud, and a lot of it can't be proven, and so forth. And I think we ought to move toward a voter ID card that can ensure that everybody should be able to get a card, use it, and vote once. And everybody gets to vote.
I have to admit, on the one hand, I guess I believed when I heard that maybe there was some voter suppression going on, but then when I heard that they were asking for picture IDs, I thought, well, haven't you always had that? Of course you want picture IDs or a voter registration card and a license or something. It didn't sound really all
And a lot of states here are not required to have any identification whatsoever. And I think I think we should have a voter ID card. We should make sure that it doesn't cost anything, so poor people can get a card without any problem. But just to make sure that nobody should doubt that this is a system that has pristine integrity, that everybody can vote and nobody can vote more than once.
I really get the feeling that you're talking about the tip of the iceberg here. I mean, Florida couldn't count their votes again. And I mean, our whole voting system in America, it seems like it really does need an overhaul, including the ID cards and everything else.
Absolutely. I mean, even as we talk, votes are still coming in.
Yeah,
This is
it makes no sense.
No, if we can process a Visa credit card charge, from here to LL Bean in a matter of seconds, why can't we do the same
with
thing
something
with
that
votes?
really matters?
Right.
Get it right.
Get it right, and make sure that everything's on the up and up.
You mentioned the debates briefly a little while ago. There were 3 presidential debates and a vice presidential debate. Thoughts about the impact of the debates?
Well, the first debate was one that clearly changed the course of the campaign. That's the debate on domestic policy. That I think it was general consensus that Governor Romney won.
The president didn't show up at all.
The president didn't show up, but it's sort of a mix of the president not showing up and Mitt Romney just doing a masterful job, I think, in that debate.
He did.
And cutting through the image that had been created about him, very much like Reagan cut through the image that had been created about him as being kind of the gunslinger candidate back in the 1980 election. So there is something that's very valuable about debates that allow candidates to speak directly to voters and in a setting where both candidates are on the stage. You can see how they interact. That's very valuable. The most important statistic to watch for in those kind of debates is the number of people who say that the debate made them more likely to vote for one candidate rather than the other. And in the first debate, more than twice as many people said Romney. They were more likely to vote for Romney than more likely to vote for.
Were these actual undecided?
This was This is for everybody. CNN had this.
So the supporters we already had were just deeper support.
Deeper support, right? And some undecideds moved there as well. In the second and third debates, it was about even.
Yeah.
Actually, even or 1 point difference between the candidates, virtually dead even.
I had to think right after that first debate that if one debate pulled support over so much more strongly to Romney, it must have been an indicator that a lot of that support for the president was a little shallow at that point.
Well, I think, and also that Romney's case about President Obama's economic record had not been fully aired to the public in a neat, succinct way.
Yeah.
And I think he was able to do that in that debate.
So as we got into the red zone, so to speak, the last 2 weeks,
Right.
A lot of things happened. Talk about that period just a little bit. It seems like it really could have gone either way at that point.
Well, I think Romney was playing it safe, too cautious. I mean, I think he was kind of riding, to some extent, the advantage that he got out of the first debate. And then you had a couple of things happen. More of the stories broke on the Benghazi Libyan situation, but those didn't seem to really be picked up by the media very much. They kind of
still
really
kind of
didn't
playing
move.
out after the election, right?
Right. And a lot of the media just sort of sat that one out. But then, of course, the big story was the hurricane.
Right.
And this, again, going back to the forecasting models and the fundamentals, this gave the president an opportunity to reinforce in voters' minds his incumbency. And the presidents are seen as they can wrap themselves in the office, and their stature rises. They're no longer just another candidate.
Right.
They are the leader of the country.
I'm kind of smiling thinking about the role that Chris Christie played. He didn't help much
Oh,
at that
no,
point.
no,
He was
I have no
so
idea.
enamored with the
Right.
president. It just
I have no idea what Chris Christie was thinking at that time, except that I'm sure he was trying to help his state, but I think he was so effusive and he had to understand the political consequences of that this undercut one of the messages of the Romney campaign, that President Obama had been a very partisan president. Obamacare was passed only with Democratic votes. And there really had been no overture, even after the 2010 midterm election, to kind of working with the Republicans. So this kind of undercut that message in a big way.
It seems so deliberate that people even started speculating what his motives might be, that he'd been irritated or annoyed by Romney earlier because it was just so off the chart.
Yeah, that could be. My guess is it's more Chris Christie being Chris Christie. And this was, if you go back to his speech at the Republican National Convention, was it about Mitt Romney? No, it was about Chris Christie.
Yeah, pretty much.
And so this was another case of Chris Christie being about Chris Christie. He's not a team player.
It was pretty annoying, actually.
When it comes to the crunch, he's about number one.
Can we talk about voter turnout a little bit? That seems to be the really big story about the election in itself. Women. People talked about the gender gap and Obama's support, women supporting Obama. Did that surprise you? Did it play out about the way you thought it would?
It's pretty much the same way, as it has in almost every election since 1980. There's been a gender gap. This is a dual-edged sword here. This is the emphasis is usually on the Republicans' problem with women. The other side of it is Democrats have a problem with men, and
Right.
so this is, you know, there's two sides of this, and I think it goes largely back to kind of political style and sort of an attitude toward leadership, where women are looking more for the compassionate leadership. People who, you know, feel their pain, and
Bill Clinton
and
feeling the pain.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
exactly, and having a sense about what their needs are and what their struggles are, and a lot of men are more no nonsense kind of, you know, get down. Well, Ross Perot, the one election where we didn't see a gender gap for the Republicans is 1992, where Ross Perot got the gender gap. He got the, you know, let's look under the hood and take, you know, very
Right.
hands-on kind of no-nonsense approach to things. And that's what I think the kind of leadership that men are more likely to respond
I guess
to.
there are two issues in voter turnout. One we already referenced a little bit, the ground game, but we're talking about the categories, I guess, at this point. The black vote came in about the way we thought. What was it, 93% to 6,
something-
you
yeah,
know, something like
yeah,
that.
that's
But that's not a surprise.
not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
The
No.
Asian American vote seemed to be up a little bit.
right.
They're a larger part of the electorate now.
Right, right.
Yeah. Big story is the Latinos, I guess, huh?
Right. Yeah. This is an area where I think Republicans feel that the Hispanic or Latino vote has been increasing. The Republicans cannot afford to lose that vote 70-30
Yeah.
year after year. So, and there's a sense that that's a gettable vote, that
Right.
it's possible for Republicans to win
There's a
some
potential
portion of that.
conservatism among Latino voters, and
At least on social issues and things like
right.
that.
And then the white male vote. Now, I guess of all the groups we're talking about, that's the only one that's actually shrinking in terms of its percentage of the total electorate, right?
Right. Well, yeah, and some of this is, again, it goes back to the get out the vote effort. You know, what we saw with the Republicans
Right.
is that they were at least a couple of election cycles behind the Democrats in getting out the vote. So it's not just that demography is the political destiny, is that a lot of those white voters, white male voters, weren't mobilized by the Republicans. So, you know, they did poorly there because they didn't, they thought their voters' natural antipathy toward
Yeah.
Obama and the liberal Democrats would bring them all out to vote.
Would do
well,
it.
they needed to work to get that vote out.
And
as
in the
well.
electronic digital era, it does seem kind of old-timey that you've got precinct workers and people knocking on doors, but that
Oh, yeah.
makes that face-to-face is really
Face to
powerful.
face and organizing, getting people to participate in the campaign. I think this is where President Obama's community organizer
Yeah.
experience and attitude really has paid off for the Democrats in a very big way. You know, he's gotten people to be involved in the
Right.
campaign. I was on both lists, emails, and in terms of getting emails from the campaign, and what I noticed was that the Romney campaign kept on asking for money. The Obama campaign asked for money, but they also invited you to go to debate parties and, you know, phone banks and all kinds of other ways of
And build
participating.
really sophisticated profiles for the person they were reaching,
Exactly.
so they knew what to ask of them.
Yeah, so they were linking
Yeah.
up voters and being very creative about how
Now,
to do so.
cynics, and there are a few of them out there, would say, okay, we spent $6 billion on this election, and at the end of it, we've got the House is still owned by the Republicans, the Democrats have the Senate, and President Obama's in the White House.
Right.
What did that $6 billion get us? What's
Well,
your
it
thinking
got
there?
got us a stalemate and more gridlock. I think that's
Yeah.
what it got us. I mean, I think that, you know, this both. I mean, the congressional races and the presidential race were all hotly contested races, and the voters basically reaffirmed, you know, where they had been before. This is a very divided nation.
Yeah.
We had a presidential race that was decided by, you know, a point here or a point there.
Right.
Things
74,000
like-
votes in Florida.
Right,
That's
and you know,
amazing.
the hurricane made a difference. Other thing, you know, on balance, I think that came out the way it did because of incumbency.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult to beat an incumbent. President Obama kind of pushed the limits on how bad an economic record could be and still survive, but he managed to survive that. I think in the House races and the Senate races, we saw pretty much what we expected, except in the Senate. Republicans missed several opportunities to pick up Senate seats because the Tea Party people managed to eliminate a number of Republican candidates who could have won and replace them with Republican Tea Party supporters who self-destructed in both Missouri and Indiana.
What's your take on the Tea Party? I mean, is this a third party, potentially a third party movement that will have a good impact on the Republican Party and then drift off? Or
you know, I think we have in both parties, we have fringe movements now. The Occupy movement on the Democratic side and the Tea Party movement on the Republican side. Problem for the Republicans is the Tea Party movement has gotten into the business of trying to select nominees. I mean, it'd be great to have their enthusiasm and support and effort and activism and so forth, but they don't know what they're doing when they pick nominees, and the Republican Party has to figure that out. On the Occupy movement, I don't think a lot of those people, you know, they talk about politics, but I don't think they get involved in politics. The Democrats ought to be trying to figure out how to get them in without having them distort democratic politics
that's a
at the
good
same
comparison, because Occupy just seems to have disappeared, whereas the Tea Party, what everyone thinks about it, I mean, they're still a real force in American politics.
Well, the Occupy people are probably in your local parks somewhere.
Yeah.
And they're getting ready for the summer. I don't know.
As a political scientist, what would you say are maybe the main takeaways from this election that you would?
Well, I think what we had here, you know, everybody, you know, rightly focuses on the battle between Romney and Obama. What I think we really had is a battle beneath that surface between the importance of the economy and the importance of incumbency. And in this case, the economic record was not bad enough to overcome the incumbent advantage that the president
And it was getting
had.
a little bit better right at the end.
I think you had to look at it. You had to look pretty hard for that.
close
Yeah,
to
I think
seeing
when you
improvement.
look at it, you know, the economic growth rate in the second quarter was GDP growth rate was 1.3, which is terrible. The initial reading in the third quarter was 2%. The forecasts for next year are like between 2.3 and 1.4. So it doesn't look like there's really. I mean, you have to look pretty
really
hard. You have to
closely.
use the microscope to find some good news.
Some technical changes. Okay, I'm really going to put you on the spot now. I think people are already starting to campaign for 2016
Right.
presidential election.
Right.
You're a forecaster. What do you expect to see happen over the next few years as we get closer to that new election?
Well, you know, it's way too early to try to figure out 2016 at this point. I think there's a lot of questions about who will be around or who will make themselves available. Whether Hillary will.
She's probably going to stop being Secretary of State, and
right?
possibly to.
Whether she'll start, and you know what Joe Biden might do. Who knows?
Marco Rubio.
Marco Rubio on the Republican. I think at this point you have to say Marco Rubio is probably the odds-on.
He's
but
young,
it's so early.
Latino, well-spoken.
He deals with a lot of the issues, the group issues that we talked about, while not sacrificing anything in terms of conservative values. So I think he's a very attractive option.
Well, we are out of time. I am so sorry we don't have an hour, because I think we would fill it very easily.
I think so.
Thank you very much for taking the time to be here with us today. Appreciate it very much.
Delighted to have been here.
The show today was brought to you by Video Media Services and the University of Oklahoma College of Arts and Sciences. Join us next time for Current Conversations. Thank you for watching.